we managed to get an amendment for the first time in the history of the United States passed that didn't audit the Fed in its entirety, but did audit the Fed during the financial crisis. And boy, did we learn a lot. And Bloomberg, by the way, was active in that effort as well. I think they brought forth a lawsuit. But what we found out is that during the financial crisis, $16 trillion in zero or low interest loans was lent out to virtually every financial institution, major financial institution in the United States and central banks all over the world. $16 trillion, zero or low interest loans in a revolving loan fund. And yet working families today have to figure out how they're going to pay 7 or 8% interest rates for their kids to go to college. So maybe we should practice low interest loans for working families and not just greedy financial institutions. In terms of auditing the Fed, that is legislation that I was on. Here's an example of strange bedfellows coming together. Ron Paul and I worked together on that legislation, of which we managed to pass some of it in the bill. So the idea of auditing the Fed does make sense to me.
We have 6 of the largest financial institutions in this country who have assets equivalent, assets of about $10 trillion, which is equivalent to about 60% of the GDP of the United States. So point number one, you have a handful of huge financial institutions that have enormous economic clout. They issue a significant amount of the mortgages in this country and the credit cards in this country. So the first issue is, for a vibrant economy, do we think it is a good idea for a handful of financial institutions to have that much economic clout? Is that what a vibrant free enterprise economy is about? I think not. And to be honest with you, I think if Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, he would come in here and say, you got to break these guys up. They're too big, they're too powerful. Second point, everybody in this room understands what happened in 2008. And let's be very clear. In my view, to a significant degree, the business model of Wall Street is not to get money out to your people, to small businesses. I believe in a boring banking system. People put money into banks. Banks lend out money to small and medium-sized businesses who create jobs, help people buy homes with mortgages. That's called old-fashioned, boring banking. That's what I believe in. What Wall Street has done is create a business model which says we really don't care about small and medium-sized businesses. What we care is about being an island unto ourselves, coming up with the most esoteric financial tools imaginable that nobody in the world knows, but enables Wall Street to make huge, huge amounts of money in highly dangerous and speculative activities. That led us to the Wall Street crash of 2008, which created the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession. I personally believe that the business model of Wall Street is fraud. I do not trust these guys. I do not believe these guys. I do not believe that they care about the economy of America. I think they care about themselves. I want a banking system where you have small, medium-sized banks where your people can walk in and somebody says, I know who you are, I know your history, you're going to get a reasonable price loan. You're part of the community. I know you. I do not want to have people as an island unto themselves, separate from the productive economy. So I believe very much, number one, and this has been my view for many, many years, if you check my record, you will find when I was in the House, I was a member of the House Financial Services Committee that dealt with deregulation. And we had the Clinton people, and we had the Republicans coming before us. And you remember what they said? They said, it's a great idea if we merge investment banks with commercial banks, with large insurance companies. It'll be great for us internationally. I never believed it for 1 second, fought against it. So, to my mind, what we have to do is A, reestablish Glass-Steagall, maintain those separate entities, but second of all, more importantly, we have got to break them up. I think the economy will do much better. I think your people, small businesses, will have access to affordable loans much more readily than is currently the case.
And you shouldn't have to be a Fortune 500 company to get a loan. For many small businesses, these loans have always come from community banks with deep local pockets. But today, those same local banks are being squeezed by regulations that don't make sense for their size and mission, like endless examinations and paperwork designed for banks that measure their assets in the many billions. And when it gets harder for small banks to do their jobs, it gets harder for small businesses to get their loans. We can ease these burdens for community banks without harming consumers and without letting up one bit on Wall Street. We should not apply the same restrictions on community banks as those needed to regulate our big banks. Now let's be clear about this. It's not the big banks that need relief from Washington. It's small banks and small businesses. We should be doing more to rein in risky behavior on Wall Street and too big to fail banks, not less. I fully support the regulations from Dodd-Frank on the big banks, but we should pass common sense community banking reform right now. However, the Republicans in the Congress insist on using this issue to give relief to community banks as a Trojan horse for rolling back protection for consumers and rolling back the rules on the biggest banks, as we're seeing right now in legislation that Republicans are introducing. We should call this what it is, a cynical attempt to game the system for those at the top. Our goal should be helping community banks serve their neighbors and customers the way they always have, to make it easier to give out responsible loans to responsible small businesses so they can do what they do best, create jobs, and help families get ahead and stay ahead.
I will be laying out my own economic policies. Again, everybody has to run his or her own campaign, and I'm going to be telling the American people what I propose and how I think it will work, and then we'll let voters make up their minds. I'm going to put out my policies, and I'll let other people speak to their policies, because I think we have to both grow the economy faster and fairer. So we have to do what will actually work in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. I will be making a speech about my economic proposals on Monday, and then I look forward to the debate about them.
I have known Joe for many, many years, and everybody who knows Joe likes him and respects him. The decision as to whether or not he runs is his. If he does run, I promise him an issue-oriented campaign. We're debating the major issues facing the American people.
Help your campaign or hurt?
We'll let the political pundits determine that.
All right.
I've known Joe Biden for many years. I like him. I respect him. A very decent guy. All I can say is if Joe Biden gets into the race, I will do everything that I can, as somebody, by the way, who has never run a negative political ad in his life. I will do everything I can to debate Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, anybody else on the real issues facing the American people. How it ultimately plays out politically, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, let me start by saying Vice President Biden is a friend of mine. He and I were colleagues in the Senate. I worked with him as First Lady. I worked with him, obviously, in President Obama's first term. And I have a great deal of admiration and affection for him. And I think he has to make what is a very difficult decision for himself and his family. And he should have the space and the opportunity to decide what he wants to do. I'm going to be running for president regardless, and I'm going to be continuing to put forth my policies. Obviously, I was proud to be a member of President Obama's cabinet, but I also have ideas where I want to go, not just build on what was done, but go beyond. And I will be laying that out. I always thought this would be a competitive campaign. I don't think anybody should have thought otherwise. And I'm going to run as hard as I can, trying to convince as many people as possible to support me and to earn all the votes I can in the caucuses and primaries. I have seen no evidence of that, but again, you know, we would have to wait and see what happened if he decided to do it. But I'm going to keep running my campaign and doing what I believe is necessary to make the case to the American people. I just want the Vice President to decide to do what's right for him and his family. And I don't think it's useful to be behind the scenes asking this or saying that. I've done none of that. And I just want him to reach whatever he thinks the right decision is. And he has to do that. And it has to be a really, really hard one. And I was at his son's funeral. I mean, I cannot even imagine the grief and the heartbreak. I mean, Joe has had more terrible events than most people can even, contemplate. Losing his first wife, losing his first daughter, now losing his son. I think everybody should, he has to do what he has to do. But I'm just going to continue with my campaign. I'm going to do what I believe I should be doing, and he will have to decide what he should be doing.
I believe that as a nation, we should be proud of the progress that we have made in recent years in terms of civil rights and electing the first African-American president in our history. But anybody who thinks we're anywhere near where we should be in terms of creating a non-discriminatory society is dead wrong. And the issues out there, I think, that we all have seen is whether it is Ferguson or whether it is Baltimore or whether it is, tragically, in South Carolina, issues of blatant racism, of police brutality, of issues of all over this country where young African Americans are walking down the street and they're being harassed by police officers. That has got to end. And what has got to end is the fact that police departments around this country cannot act as occupying forces. They have to be seen as being part of the community. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, we moved toward community policing, which does just that. It makes the police department part of the community, not an outside force coming in. And again, as a mayor, I worked with police for 8 years, and most of these people work really hard under very difficult circumstances. Not easy being a cop. But when a police officer breaks the law, when young black people are beaten up or sometimes killed, that is clearly unacceptable, and police officers who commit these crimes must be punished. Furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about civil rights, we also have got to understand that poverty and incarceration rates among the African American community is at levels which are almost incomprehensible. There is a debate exactly about the statistics, Jeanette, but the guess is that today, if we do not change things, the likelihood is that an African American male baby born today stands a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance of ending up in jail, and that half of young African Americans will be at some point or another in their lives arrested. Now, what that tells me is that when real unemployment for young African Americans is over 50%, that maybe it makes a little bit more sense to start investing in education and jobs rather than in more incarceration and more jails. And I feel very strongly about that. You're seeing just a horrendous attack upon a young generation of people, which is an unbelievable human tragedy. So the fight has got to be to create police departments which are well-trained, which reflect the demographics of their communities. We've got to get military equipment out of cities so that police departments are not looked at as occupying forces. But we've also got to address, in addition to all of that, the serious economic problems facing minority communities all over this country, and I'm pledged to do that. I was an organizer, I was involved in the Congress on Racial Equality. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue, you're right. It's not something, it's something that I've been doing for my whole life, my adult life. When I was in college, I got arrested as part of a civil rights demonstration to end segregation in Chicago schools. I went to the University of Chicago. I was involved in making sure that the University of Chicago at that point did not run segregated housing. So, I've been involved in the civil rights movement for many, many years. But the point here is we can give all the great speeches that we want, but what we need is real action to break down racism in America and to create economic opportunity for all of our people, including young African Americans and young Hispanics. I don't think racism is part of our DNA. But I think when we start off with a nation that before, obviously, we became a nation where Africans were brought into this country to be slaves, where the Native Americans were treated beyond shamefully and driven off of their land, and in some cases massacred. We do start off, and where immigrants who came to this country, whether they're Irish or Italians or Asians or Jews, whoever they were often treated shamefully. There is a lot of that historical racist baggage that is around our shoulders. On the other hand, what I would tell you, Morris, is we have made some real progress in recent years, but we've got a long, long way to go. As I mentioned earlier, it is no small thing. We take it for granted that we have an African-American president of the United States. 20, 30 years ago, I doubt that very many people thought that that would be possible, but we did overcome that racist heritage in order to elect an African-American. Today, what we are seeing is Republicans trying to divide us up, playing the anti-immigrant card often against Hispanics, and that is an issue that we have got to address very boldly through comprehensive immigration reform. So I think, and I believe this very sincerely, I'm not the first person to say this, but I do say, as somebody whose dad came to this country at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket and became as proud an American as you could possibly know because of the opportunities it gave him and his family. Being a nation of diverse people is, in fact, a real strength. And what we have got to overcome is, in fact, as Morris indicates, this centuries of racial tension and racism. I think we are making progress, but obviously we have a long, long way to go. And Tom, I'll tell you something that does concern me very much, is that today, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there are hundreds of racist hate groups that are out there now who are trying to foment racial hatred in America. And they are influencing too many young people who have not a whole lot of education. And we need the FBI to take a hard look at these organizations when they are breaking the law. But clearly trying to create a nation and moving toward a nation where we, in fact, fulfill the vision of the Declaration of Independence, that all men, and we believe women, are created equal and entitled to certain unalienable rights. That is our goal. And we've got a lot of work to do it, and I pledge to Morris that I will do everything in my power to try to take on those people who are trying to divide us and bring our nation together.
You're right. They still stubbornly exist. There is no question about it. And I think anybody who has seen, one of the, I suppose a positive development is if anybody thinks that African Americans were not beaten and killed when under police custody for decades, you would be sorely mistaken. That is, of course, what has happened for decades. The difference now is a lot of that activity and those actions are being recorded on cell phones. And the whole world is seeing what the world did not see before. So here's what I think. I think that we have made progress in terms of race relations in this country, or else we would not be having an African American as president of America. We should be proud of that. But I think that anyone who does not believe that, tragically, that racism is alive and well in America, that we do not have hundreds of hate groups whose whole function in life is to pit white people against blacks and Hispanics and Jews, Catholics, anybody else, you would be mistaken. That tragedy exists. So what do we do about it? What we do about it, among other things, is make sure that we have very significant police department reform in America. Okay? What that means is that not only do we have body cameras, so we know what police officers are doing, but we also have a new regimen. I think force is used too much. I saw some people here see the Sandra Bland video. Frankly, if that was a white woman, nobody believes for 1 second that would have happened. Yanked out of a car for no particular reason, thrown to the ground, assaulted, handcuffed, thrown in jail, dead 3 days later. Her crime was she failed to make a right signal on her turn. You don't get thrown in jail for failing to signal where you're turning. So what we need to do is to take a hard look at minimum sentencing right now. We have far too many people in jail for nonviolent offenses. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth. We need to take a hard look at the use of force that police departments now utilize. I think we need to take a very hard look at some of our drug laws, to be honest with you. Too many people are being arrested and sent to jail for nonviolent offenses, and I want to take a hard look at that. But at the end of the day, we have got to continue the struggle to become a non-discriminatory society where people, as Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, are judged by their character, by who they are as people, not by the color of their skin. And that means we have to have a Justice Department being vigorous, fighting discrimination, fighting against police departments who are doing improper things to minorities. And there is an enormous amount of work to do in that area.
So you think racism is alive and well in the country?
Tragically, it is. I think it's undeniable.
Do you think
And
some
I
people?
think, I'm sorry.
Do you think some people running for the presidency might be a bit racist?
I think that the statement, one would hope, look, you're never going to rid this country or the world. You stop and you think, Javier, and I did think about this recently, and I can't give you the answer. You think back to the origins of the United States, before we were a country, right? Do you remember what the settlers, the people who came from Europe, did to the Native Americans? What atrocities were committed? And then we had the horror of slavery, and how many millions of people died and were dehumanized as a result of slavery. And then we had the attacks against Asians, and now we're seeing it against Latinos. For whatever reason, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I do not know why people apparently feel good about themselves when they're putting down and insulting other people. The statements that Donald Trump made were clearly outrageous, And it troubles me very much that a candidate for president would stoop to that level, period.
Look, we are reaching out to all kinds of groups. Absolutely. I met with folks at Black Lives Matter. We're reaching out to Latino groups. We're reaching out to the unions. We're fighting to expand Social Security, and we're reaching out to senior groups. We're reaching out to healthcare groups because we believe that everybody in America is entitled to healthcare. We're reaching out to everybody. But on this issue of Black Lives Matter, let me be very clear. The issue that they are raising is a very, very important issue. And there is no candidate for president who will be stronger in fighting against institutional racism and, by the way, reforming a broken criminal justice system. Chuck, we have more people in jail in the United States of America than any other country on earth. And we need real changes. We need to do away with the militarization of local police departments. We need to do away with minimum sentencing. We need education and jobs for our young people rather than jails and incarceration.
Finally, Black Lives Matter, and Black lives should matter, and Black lives must matter. And what we've got to do is approach the very real challenges within our society with that kind of commitment, not just from the head, but from the heart. Yes, do we need to have reforms in our criminal justice system? Do we need to have better policing practices and more accountability? Yes. Do we need to deal with mass incarceration? Yes. But I think it's a mistake if we don't also be honest enough to say we have systemic issues of race and justice in our country that are that are really troubling for anybody who came of age, as I did, during the Civil Rights era, who can remember when the Civil Rights Act was passed, when Selma happened, when the Voting Rights Act passed, who can remember the pictures, the images on TV, who can recall what it was like for so many of my friends who are African American when they were growing up and where they couldn't go and what they couldn't do. I'm disappointed we haven't made even more progress. I'm gratified by the progress we have made, but I am adamant that we must do more. And so for me, I will do whatever I can to create more space, more opportunities for young people of color who really feel as though they are forgotten, they are marginalized, they are left behind in a way that is painful to me. And the lives that have been lost are a great shame that we have to admit together and do everything we can in our communities to try to prevent from ever happening again. So I'm going to, during this campaign and then certainly as president, lay out an agenda, lay out a plan, work with communities across our country, bring people together, because we've come too far to go back now. And so let's all be committed to moving forward together.
On the federal level and certainly in states across America, decisions were made in the 80s and 90s to deal with what was at that time a very high crime rate that was particularly affecting poor people, people of color in the cities. Some I see heads nodding. You remember those days. And I think that a lot was done that went further than it needed to go. And so now we are facing problems with mass incarceration. And let me just tell you why that's a problem. It's a problem because in our country we have too many people in jail and prison who committed low-level, non-violent offenses. And we have too many people who haven't been convicted of anything but can't afford bail and sometimes are there for months, if not years. And we know for a fact that if you take an African-American young man and you take a young white man and they do the same thing, the rates of arrest, of incarceration, of conviction for the young African-American man is much higher. And so we have to address these inequities, these injustices. And there are some good thinking going on about it. President Obama has a policing commission that has some good recommendations. First speech I gave in this campaign was about mass incarceration and body cameras for police officers. But we also have to look at how we do more to prevent people from ending up, on the brink of being arrested or finding themselves incarcerated. And we have to look at the other end of the pipeline about how we provide more opportunity when somebody comes out. Because right now there's just not the kind of systems and programs that are going to help, young men in particular, find a better path forward. So I think there's a lot we can do, and there's some good thinking. If you haven't read the President's Policing Commission, I recommend it to you. It was a good cross-section of experts, police chiefs, activists, etc. And I think if we were to follow that roadmap, and the last thing I'll say is, this is one of the few areas where maybe we are going to get bipartisan agreement. Actually, there are Republicans working with Democrats to make some of these changes at the federal level. However, most of what needs to be done has to happen on the state level. So the federal government has to set the example, and we have to demonstrate that we're not going to continue to militarize our streets by sending basically weapons of war to our streets. We have to use any federal dollars that go to support local law enforcement to do more training and more work to make sure that our police officers are better able to deal with the realities that they are facing and not overreact. So I think there's a lot here, and that's why I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. It's very important that young people like yourself do that.
The answer is I am a democratic socialist, and I think we have a lot to learn from countries like Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Finland and many of the European countries who have done a much better job than we have in terms of income and wealth inequality, guaranteeing health care to all of their people. If you go to Denmark today, or you go to Finland, do you know how much college costs? Zero. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, in Finland, they actually pay you to go to college. Should I apologize for that? I think that's a good idea. I think we want to make sure that every kid in this country is able to get an education regardless of the income of their families. Our child care system in this country for working families, a total embarrassment. Many families just cannot find affordable quality child care in what are the most important years of a human being's life, 0 to 4. So I think what we need is a government which taps the innovation that is so strong in America. We are a very entrepreneurial society. Every day somebody's come up with a great product, creating wealth. That is a good thing. But when you have a situation where the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, Steve, when today 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%, when one family, the Waltons, own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people, that is not an economy that works for the people of this country. It's not sustainable, it's not moral, and we've got to make some fundamental changes in the way we do economics in this country. The way to do that, and that's a very good question, is to say, go out, innovate, create new products, create wealth. We want you to do that. But at the same time, you can't have all of it. You can't have all of the wealth that's coming and being created in this country. You have to be part of America. And what I say to the billionaire class is their greed. We appreciate their innovations, but their greed is destroying America. They cannot have it all. So I think, you look at countries around the world, we're not the only innovative countries, but you need a tax system which is fair. When you have major corporations in this country who are stashing virtually, tens of billions of dollars in profits in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, that's wrong. They've got to start paying their fair share of taxes. Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in the world, reminds us that his effective tax rate is lower than his private secretary's. That's also wrong. So you got to say to the wealthiest people in this country, sorry, if you want to enjoy America, you have to accept your responsibilities, and your responsibilities is paying your fair share of taxes so that our kids can go to college, so that we can have a strong child care system, so that we can rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, which is an international embarrassment, and create the millions of jobs we need.
Bob Reich has done extraordinary work over the years. I saw that film. In fact, we showed that film all over the state of Vermont and got a very popular response. And here's the issue. What we need to do is to come forward with a progressive economic agenda which says to the American people that if we stand together, we can create economics which grows the middle class, which lowers poverty in America, and which creates millions of decent paying jobs. And let me just very briefly, Daniel, tell you what I think should be in that agenda. Number one, poll after poll always tells us that the issue of real concern to the American people, of most concern, is jobs and the economy. And the way we address that issue most effectively and quickly is through a massive federal jobs program rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail, water systems, levees, dams, older schools, etc. I've introduced legislation that would invest $1 trillion over a 5-year period. It would create and maintain some 13 million jobs. So that creating jobs is enormously important. Number two, we got to change our trade policy. I am very disappointed by the vote this week in terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think it just continues a disastrous trade policy which allows companies to shut down in America and move abroad. And I'll continue my efforts to defeat. Fast Track has passed. I'll continue my efforts to defeat the TPP. It's going to be an uphill fight. We've got to rally the American people. We need a new trade policy which works for workers and not just CEOs. We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, which to my mind is $15 an hour over the next few years. We need pay equity for women workers. Women should not be making 78 cents on the dollar compared to men. We've also got to learn from many European countries that family and medical leave when you have a baby or somebody in the family is sick should be a right, at least 1 month a year off for family and medical leave. Paid sick leave should be a right. Guaranteed vacation time of at least 10 days a year should be a right. So those are some of the ingredients, and there are more, obviously, of what I think is a way to put money into the hands of working people. And when they have that money, they're going to go out and spend that money, and they are going to create more jobs. The level of income and wealth inequality in this country is grotesque, it is unsustainable, and it is not America. 1/10 of 1% now own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. 99% of all new income today is going to the top 1%. In the last 30 years, we have seen a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class and working families to the very wealthiest people in this country, and that has got to be reversed.
Before I answer this very important question, let me back it up and put it into a context. Before we decide how we go forward, we have to know where we are today, okay? And sometimes we don't discuss that enough. Where we are today is that median family income in America is $5,000 less, almost $5,000 less than it was in 1999. Where we are today is that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. Where we are today is that 45 million Americans are living in poverty. Where we are today, Javier, is that a recent study came out from the Economic Policy Institute, and this is what it said about youth unemployment. For high school graduates between 17 and 20 who are white, real unemployment is 33%, Hispanic youth unemployment 36%, African American youth unemployment 51%. 35 million people have no health insurance. We have a child care system which is a disaster. Working families, in most cases, are not confident they can find affordable quality child care. That is some of the realities of the American economy today. And you ask me, am I a democratic socialist? I am. What does that mean? It means that you have the courage to look at countries around the world that are, in fact, doing things better than we are, just as there are things that we do that are better than what other countries do. And smart people look and steal the best ideas available, right? That's what business people do. I was a mayor. We looked at cities all over America. What ideas? What is San Francisco doing? What is Austin doing? What can we steal? This is what we can steal. From the business perspective, how many of your small business people struggle every day and spend huge amounts of time on health insurance? Correct?
An incredible large portion, right. Absolutely.
And I would think that a small businessman would like to spend his or her time worrying about their business, how their business is going to grow, not figuring out, talking to 87 different people as to how they're going to get affordable health care for their workers. Yes? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Every other major Western country has health care as a right. Now, how about, not only will that be a benefit to the people of this country, it takes the burden off a small business. Is that a good idea? I think it is. We are the only major country that doesn't do that. What about family and medical leave? Today in America, a low-income woman gives birth, she has to get back to work in 5 days. Is that right? Is that morally right? I don't think so. We are the only major country that does not provide family and medical leave. What about education? You know and I know that this country does not grow unless we have a good educational system. There are hundreds of thousands of bright, qualified young people in America today who desperately want a higher education. They can't get that education. You know why? They can't afford it. That's why I believe we should make public colleges and universities tuition free. I think it helps the business community. It helps America. So when I talk about democratic socialism, I'm saying take a look at what's going on in Sweden. Free college education, free health care. I think it makes sense to look at countries that are doing good things for working families. Taxes, all right? I'm sure we may have a disagreement on this.
We may.
We may. But let me be very frank. When you have the most unequal level of income and wealth inequality of any major Western country, when you have major corporations, I'm not talking about small businesses, major multi-billion-dollar corporations stashing their money in the Cayman Islands, not paying a nickel in taxes, I think that that is wrong. And I will do away with those loopholes.
Well, obviously, Bill and I have been blessed, and we're very grateful for the opportunities that we had, but we've never forgotten where we came from, and we've never forgotten the kind of country that we want to see for our granddaughter, and that means that we're going to fight to make sure that everybody has the same chances to live up to his or her own God-given potential. So I think that most Americans understand that the deck is stacked for those at the top, and I am running a campaign that is very clearly stating we want to reshuffle that deck. We want to get back to having more opportunities for more people so that they can make more out of their own lives, and I think that's exactly what America's looking for.
What he said is very important, and it's especially important here in Nevada because the last time I checked, I think you still have the highest unemployment rate in the country. Is that still right? Over 7%, I think. So you have a lot of people who used to have jobs, and you have a lot of people who used to be able to work full-time who now can only get part-time jobs, and you have a lot of people who need help, and they need the kind of assistance he was talking about. I will do everything I can to try to make sure that we continue to provide the supports that individuals and families deserve. I would like to see everybody get a good job with a decent income that has rising opportunity and a paycheck that reflects their hard work. That will be my primary mission. But while we're trying to get there, we've got to do more to help people who are doing the best they can. You know, nobody who works full-time in America should still be in poverty. That is just, to me, backwards. So, you know, as I said, I work for the Children's Defense Fund. I was on the Legal Services Corporation where we defended a lot of the rights of people to get access to benefits that they needed for themselves and their children. So I come from that kind of background, and I will do what I can to make sure that we remember those who are struggling. I want to be a president for the struggling, the striving, and the successful. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure our country doesn't turn our backs on people who need help. Food stamps, housing help, earned income tax credit, the whole list. And the final thing I would say about this is, you know, I don't say this from a partisan or a personal perspective. It's just a fact. The economy needs the kind of continuing leadership provided by having a Democrat in the White House.
This is what we have proposed, Alex. What I've said is that it is insane, and I use that word quite advisedly, that we have hundreds of thousands of bright young people in this country who are qualified, who are hardworking, who want to get a higher education, but are unable to do so because of the lack of income in their families. And you just made that case. So we have this, and you're in New Zealand because of that. These people are not only being, these young people are not only being denied the opportunity in many cases to make it to the middle class, but they are unable to contribute their intellectual capabilities to improving life in our country. They're unable to become the scientists, the doctors, the engineers, the teachers, the police officers that we need because they're not getting the education they require. That's insane. And then you got millions more who are leaving school deeply in debt, $50,000, $100,000. If you're a dentist, it may be $300,000 or $400,000. And they're burdened with this incredible debt at high interest rates for decades. So we have introduced legislation, which I will fight for as President of the United States, that A, makes tuition free at all public colleges and universities in America, and number two, substantially lowers interest rates on student debt. I think that that is not only the right thing to do from the perspective of the individuals impacted, it is absolutely imperative for the future of this country if we are to have the best educated workforce in the world and create the economy that we need in the future. I am 100% against educational privatization, of which the right wing in this country is pushing very hard. They want to privatize everything under the sun, including our military and our public services and Social Security and public education as well. So it goes without saying that I am strongly opposed to that. But what I will also tell you, Victoria, is that we're going to do everything that we can to end No Child Left Behind, and the burden that many teachers and students are under today, where schools are teaching kids to take tests rather than giving them the quality education that they need. And I'm on the committee that deals with that, so we're hopefully going to end this No Child Left Behind and come up with a system that works much better for the kids and the teachers.
It's not a question of convincing the banks, it's a question of changing the law. What Jesse is talking about is the absurdity of folks today who have student debt. We have over $1 trillion in student debt from millions of Americans who are paying 6, 8, 10%. They cannot, by law, refinance. They're stuck with that indefinitely. The legislation that I have offered will, in fact, allow Jesse to refinance. Right now, you can refinance your home, your mortgage, at 2, 3, 4%, depending on where you live, and yet people are stuck with 8, 10, 12% interest rates on their student debt. That's pretty crazy. And then in addition to that, the government, which now holds much of that debt, is making huge profits on those high interest rates. Allow people to refinance, and the government profiteering on student debt. We can lower interest rates very, very significantly, and that's what my legislation does.
I know a little bit about what your governor did. I try to keep up with that. And it was really so disappointing. He basically slashed funding for colleges and universities. He eliminated some of the loan and scholarship programs for low-income Wisconsin students. He has made it more expensive and harder for people in Wisconsin to send their kids to college, pay the freight, or for the kid to have to do it himself or herself. But one of the areas that you alluded to that really surprised me is his refusal to allow the payments on student loans to be deducted from your state income tax, right? So in effect, he said no to lowering both student loan and tax burdens on people who have student debt. I just think that's absolutely the wrong direction. And for me, it's pretty simple. Under my plan, my college compact, you will be able to refinance all of your debt, public and private. You'll be able to consolidate into public programs because, as I said in my remarks, I don't want the federal government making money any longer off of people paying their student debts. It should be an investment. And so I am very committed to having you be able, if you're at 7%, get it down to what the interest rate now is, because you can refinance your car, you can refinance your home. You ought to be able to refinance your student debt, which for many people is by far their biggest obligation. I also want more people to take advantage, which is why I'm going to streamline and consolidate the programs for income-based repayment. Income-based repayment is a way of getting costs down for a lot of people with student debt, but not enough people know about it. So in addition to refinancing, you go into an income-based repayment program and you would lower your monthly payment to a percentage of your income. Then I want to put an end date. If you are current and you are paying what you're supposed to pay, especially after you've been refinanced, you're doing income-based repayment, then at the end of 10 years, if you're doing public service work, or the end of 20 years, the loan should be forgiven. Now, if you are not, if you're not pulling your weight, if you're in default and you're not paying what you should pay, it's going to take you longer because we're going to have to get you current. We're going to have to get you in a program that will help you better understand how to deal with all of your other obligations. But I can tell you that for me, This approach is a win-win-win. It's a win for the individuals and their families because a lot of families, parents and grandparents, guarantee these loans. I've had a number of people tell me as grandparents that they're guaranteeing their grandchildren's student loans. Some grandparents have taken out mortgages in order to do that. So this is not just about the individual, this is about a whole family committed to your education. So I want to relieve the burdens. Secondly, I want states to figure out ways to make the right decisions about decreasing costs. There are a lot of studies about what really adds to your college experience and what doesn't. You know, I hear and read that, you know, the governor of your state, he's just basically taken a big meat cleaver, you know, just cut, as opposed to saying, you know, how are we going to get those costs down? And there's some clever ideas. You know, I'll give you one, because in my plan, I do expect students to work at least 10 hours a week. You know, I think that's important because you know, when I went to college, when I went to law school, I worked, and it was a good experience. It taught me a lot. I want more people to understand what role each can play, and for our country, it's really important we help people succeed with their education, make their contribution, and in fact, China has now made an announcement they want to get 200 million college graduates. Why? Because they look at the same statistics we do. We have an increasingly competitive global economy, and it's really important you have the skills to be competitive. So this is not just a nice thing to do for students and families. It's not just important to hold colleges and universities and states accountable. This is about our economy, how competitive and successful we can be. So I'll have more to say about your governor as we move forward, but I think that's a very good example of what I disagree with.
You know, it goes without saying that as perhaps the most progressive member of the U.S. Senate, I have strong disagreements with Republicans on many issues. But what is really disturbing, and I think an international embarrassment, is to the degree that virtually all Republicans still refuse to acknowledge that climate change is real and caused by human activity and causing devastating problems in America and around the world. Now, here's the good news. I think because young people are getting more and more involved in the march in New York City, there were 400,000 people, there are many young people. You're seeing more and more Republicans saying, you know what, yes, I know the Koch brothers tell us not to talk about it, but climate change is real. And I brought forth an amendment on the floor of the Senate. I think we had 5 Republicans to say climate change is real, caused by human activity. On the other hand, are we having the kind of success I would like to see in moving to sustainable energy, to moving aggressively to energy efficiency, moving toward rail, moving toward weatherization? We have made some progress under President Obama. Solar is growing in leaps and bounds. You have states like your state doing a good job on Texas, on wind. Iowa's doing a good job, but we have a long, long way to go. So we are making some progress. But what the scientists tell us, there is just a window of opportunity.
The Republicans will say, when Ted Cruz announced for president last week, he said that the people who are pushing this idea that somehow the science proves climate change, it is the scientists who are not telling us the truth. Those people are the science is not real. It's junk science.
Well, this is, take a deep breath and think about what Ted is saying. If the scientists don't know science, and Ted Cruz knows science, you're on and I mean this seriously, you're on a very, very shaky ground, because just think about it, you make public policy based on a certain set of factual assumptions. And, if you go to the doctor and you want to believe that the doctor has some scientific background in order to diagnose your problems, well, in all due respect, there are people who spent their lives studying climate, and the vast majority of them tell us that climate change is real. To the best of my knowledge, Ted Cruz is not a climatologist.
What I believe, and I've said many, many times, is that climate change is the great planetary crisis that we face. and that we have a moral responsibility to leave this planet for our kids and our grandchildren in a way that is habitable. And if the scientists are right, and I think they are, if we do not move extremely aggressively to transform our energy system, what the scientists are telling us is that by the end of this century, this planet will be between 5 and 10 degrees warmer, which means more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the ocean, more rising sea levels, more disease, more migrations of people, more international conflict. So I can't think of any issue that is of more significance than this. And I'm proud to tell you that 2 years ago I introduced with Senator Barbara Boxer of California the most comprehensive climate change legislation, which for the first time imposed a tax on carbon, raised substantial sums of money for energy efficiency and sustainable energies like wind, solar, geothermal, and other sustainable energies. So I consider this, and I, by the way, very, very delighted that the Pope has recently made this into an encyclical and told the world how important this issue is. So count me in as somebody who believes this is a major, major, major issue, that we have to take on the fossil fuel industry and transform our energy system.
I believe in what Pope Francis said in his recent encyclical. I believe that climate change is the great environmental planetary crisis that we face. And I think that we have a moral responsibility to leave this planet to our kids and our grandchildren. I have 7 beautiful grandchildren in a way that is habitable. So I have to reverse the order of your question. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, how do we do that? Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you that the way you do it is have the United States of America lead the world. We can't do it alone. This is a global problem, working with China and Russia and India and countries all over the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel into energy efficiency and such sustainable energies as wind, solar, geothermal, and other new emerging technologies. The debate is over. The scientific community has told us loud and clear that climate change is real, caused by human activity, and already causing devastating problems. So for the sake of the planet, how do we go forward? And I think President Obama has made some fighting against a whole lot of people who refuse to even accept the reality of climate change, has made some good initiatives. But we have got to go further if we are going to save this planet and lead the world in transforming our energy system. Number 2, how do you do that? Well, I think one of the ways you do it in terms of energy efficiency is making, in terms of climate change, is moving aggressively toward energy efficiency. Our rail system lags far behind Europe, Japan, and even China. We can take an enormous number of trucks off the road by having a modern rail system. We also need to be weatherizing homes all over this country and buildings as well. We have seen huge growth in solar, despite opposition from Republicans in Congress and in wind. We need to subsidize, provide tax credits for sustainable energy. So to my mind, saving this planet for our kids and our grandchildren, preventing droughts and floods and extreme weather disturbances is a huge priority. And I would invest very heavily in transforming our energy system.
No, it's not. And I understand, I know what the right answer in terms of getting votes would have been. The right answer would have been, you bet I will ban extraction on public lands. And then if somebody said, and how are you going to do that? Well, I will advocate for it. And how are you going to get it done? I will keep advocating for it. We have to change our energy policy. I have been clear about that. I have been repeatedly clear about that. And we also have to do it in a way that doesn't disrupt our economy. I mean, it's really easy to say, yeah, let's ban all of these fossil fuel extractions and forget about all the people who are employed, who have jobs, who rely on the energy. So I am a strong believer in tackling climate change in the very strongest way we can to have that transition away from it into clean, renewable energy, solar and wind, and advanced biofuels and the like. So I will have to say to you, I'm sorry if the answer, the specific answer, wait just a minute, dear, wait.
As president, would you sign a bill, yes or no, please, in favor of allowing the Keystone XL pipeline?
Well, as you know, I was the Secretary of State who started that process. I was the one who put into place the investigation. I have now passed it off as obvious, because I'm no longer there, to Secretary Kerry. This is President Obama's decision, and I am not going to second guess him because I was in a position to set this in motion, and I do not think that would be the right thing to do. So I want to wait and see what he and Secretary Kerry decide. If it's undecided when I become president, I will answer your question.
I think it has to do, to be honest with you, with sexism, that many of the businesses are owned by men. I think it is also part of an historical trend where 50 years ago, 40 years ago, well, women maybe were working for a few hours a week and then they went home and took care of the kids. That reality has changed, as you well know. Mm-hmm. We have the vast majority of people, of working women, many of them have kids, are now in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And it is unacceptable, period. Your statistics tell us that we are discriminating against women, and I very much applaud your organization. Not every business organization does that. But to say it is indefensible, I don't know how anyone can defend saying that women make 70 or 78 cents, whatever the number may be, cents per hour compared to men. So I very strongly believe in two things when it comes to pay. One you may agree with me, and one you may not.
Okay.
All right. First one I do agree with and have strongly supported in the Senate is we have to move toward pay equity for women workers. End of discussion. Women deserve the same pay as men. We're on the same page.
Agreed.
Where we may not be on the same page is that I believe that the federal minimum wage of $7.25 is a starvation wage and is totally inadequate. So I am supportive of the efforts of Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, of raising the minimum wage over a period of a few years to $15 an hour. I have introduced legislation in the Senate, and as president, would fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage.
You know, I said the other day that, you know, one of the Republican candidates, Mr. Trump, has said some, you know, very offensive, outrageous comments. But you need to look at what everybody else is saying, too. I mean, when Marco Rubio said no abortion even for rape or incest, that was hard to even believe. When George Bush, or I confused, Jeb Bush said, oh well. When Jeb Bush said that he thought $500,000 for women's health was too much and wasn't needed, and they all want to defund Planned Parenthood, I don't know who they talk to. I don't know who they spend time with. They sure don't spend time with, you know, women who find out they had breast cancer because they got their screening, their checkup at Planned Parenthood. They sure don't know about the women who get prenatal care, who get testing for different conditions. I mean, you really wonder, who are they listening to? And that's why I think that it's pretty deep on the other side, that there is a real dismissal of the way most women live our lives, and including, you know, some of the challenges like equal pay for equal work. That is not a myth. It's a reality, and it hurts women who work hard, and it hurts their families, and it hurts our economy. Or not raising the minimum wage, and we know 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women. A lot of them mothers with little kids that they are supporting. So I think it's fair to say that, you know, there are enough examples from enough of the candidates running that it does look like a pattern, and we need to stand up against it. And, you know, when I talk about the economy and I put forth a plan for strong growth, fair growth, and long-term growth, I really emphasized how we need to make sure women can compete and succeed in the workplace. You know, Mitch McConnell said, oh, she's playing the gender card. Well, if equal pay for equal work is playing the gender card, deal me in, because that's just fundamental fairness as far as I'm concerned.
Well, this is one of the jobs where they have to pay you the same. You know, but there are so many examples where that doesn't happen, where women doing the same job are not paid the same. So as president, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure not just the president gets paid the same, whether it's a woman or a man, but every woman in every job gets paid the same as the men who are doing that job.
I voted for the war in Afghanistan. Whether history will recall that as the right vote or not, I don't know, but I did. And the reason I did is obviously we knew, or at least had a pretty good idea, who led the attack on 9/11, Osama bin Laden. He was being harbored in Afghanistan. They refused to give him up, and I supported our troops going in there. I did not know then that that war would go on and on and on. That I didn't know. I strongly opposed the war in Iraq, and I think history will record that as the right vote. Now, how you deal with ISIS is a difficult issue. None of these issues are simple, and anyone who jumps up and thinks they have the magical solution is usually very, very wrong. But this is what my fear is. We have been in war in Iraq and Afghanistan for over a decade. The cost of that war in human life and suffering and financially has been very, very heavy. I strongly, strongly fear that some of my colleagues are hell-bent in getting us involved in never-ending wars in the quagmire of the Middle East. And I will do my best to oppose that. Now, right now, what you have is a situation where, as an example, Saudi Arabia, some of you may know, is a country controlled by a multi-billion-dollar family, one of the wealthiest families in the world. Turns out that Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget in the world. They have a large military budget. Now, why in God's name is the United States contemplating sending combat troops into Iraq again when you got the Saudis sitting there watching us do that? I think what you have now in the Middle East is, in fact, a war for the soul of Islam. What will Islam be? Will it be the peaceful religion that many believe it to be, or will it be an ISIS form? And I think it is absolutely incumbent for Saudi Arabia, for Qatar, for Kuwait, for Jordan, for the countries in that region to get actively involved in that effort against ISIS. I think the United States and Western Europe should be supportive of their effort. But I do not believe that the United States should lead that effort.
Well, I'm against, let me answer the first part of your question, against, if the president's proposal came to the floor of the Senate, I would vote against it.
You think it would pass? Your no vote notwithstanding, would it pass?
I don't know. It would be probably a close vote. And it's, the problem is the language is too open-ended, and it allows for us to be there for much too long. And the second part of your question was?
Are drone strikes cause more problems than they solve?
Sometimes they do.
Isn't our war on terror essentially fueling itself?
That has been the case in some instances. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This ISIS and these other terrorist groups mean us harm, and we've got to figure out a way to defeat them. But if a drone attack on an innocent village kills a dozen men and women, does that help us bring those people into association with us? It does not.
Substantively, isn't the policy of ISIS and positions similar to that of our ally Saudi Arabia?
No. I mean, I'm not, as I just mentioned, Saudi Arabia is a country which is authoritarian, which is oligarchic.
But you're not equating the two.
Well, I think he may have.
But you're not
no,
equating
I
the two.
would not, no.
So Bernie Sanders is president, whatever party you get elected under. And ISIS puts out a video in which Jim Foley or some other journalist, or some non-journalist for that matter, has been beheaded. Is the response of our country to the beheading of one of our citizens to do nothing?
No, and I don't think the president is doing nothing.
But would you do nothing?
No, of course not. And it's not a question of the beheading of one person. What ISIS is doing wherever they have conquered it's unspeakable. I mean, literally is unspeakable. It's barbaric. They have got to be defeated. But if the question of American foreign policy is it our ground troops in combat now leading the fight, or is it the Muslim countries? You got billionaire countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, you have the UAE, you have Jordan there. They have got to lead the effort with our support. But ISIS remains a very serious problem, and I want to see them defeated.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Look, the world is a crazy place today. It is a dangerous place. It is a very complicated place. And I think it's impossible for me to give you a 30-second answer of what we do. But this is what I do think. I voted against the war in Iraq. I think history will record that as the right vote. And what we have got to understand is that when you go to war, very often you have unintended consequences. You heard, I heard, people like Vice President Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, President Bush saying, hey, we're going to go in, we're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein, our troops will be back 6 months later, we'll establish democracy in the Middle East. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. But many of us understood that in the real world that was not going to happen. There were unintended consequences. We are suffering those unintended consequences today. So I think, number one, we have got to understand that war has these consequences. Be very, very, very careful before you commit our troops into harm's way. Number two, you can't do it alone. You need an international coalition. The United States, I do not want to see the United States in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. We've got to work with the world. We've got to take on ISIS. But the countries in the region themselves, the Muslim countries, have got to lead that effort with our support. I voted against NAFTA for a number of reasons. But by the way, in my view, if you look at the impact that NAFTA has had on Mexico, one of the impacts that it has had that we have got to own up to is massive dislocation of small farms in Mexico and driving a lot of workers off of those farms into the cities and into very bad situations. Second of all, I will tell you that I am concerned when I see how aggressive China has been in moving all over the world. Obviously, Latin America is our neighbor, and I am not impressed to the degree that we have been reaching out with Latin America. I support very strongly the President's initiative in normalizing relations with Cuba. I think that's a step forward. But I think that to a too significant degree, we have ignored those people who are closest to us. And I think we've got to work with them in intelligent ways to improve their economies. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that what we have seen in Guatemala or El Salvador or Honduras, the kind of violence and mob rule there resulting in kids having to flee, that is something that the United States has to pay attention to. Lastly, broadly speaking, on foreign policy, I voted against the war in Iraq. I think history will record that as the right vote. And if you read some of my speeches at that point, much of what I feared would happen, in fact, did happen in terms of the destabilization of that region. It amazes me very much how little some of my Republican colleagues have learned from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think as many of the listeners who at least have some short-term memory can recall, what President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, the whole crew of these people were telling us, hey, a war in Iraq, not a problem. We'll go in there. We'll get rid of Saddam Hussein. We'll establish a democracy. Our troops will come home with minimal loss. We'll move to democracy throughout the Middle East. Well, it didn't quite happen like that. And I think Corky's point is very right on, very well spoken. And that is, it seems to me that these guys who are so quick to attack the president's effort to negotiate an agreement with Iran to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. Well, it's not a perfect agreement. Well, I'm sure it's not. And what's their alternative? Is it another war? Is it perpetual war in the Middle East? So I think Corky picked up on a very important point, is how quick these guys are to push aside, to dismiss serious efforts trying to negotiate an agreement rather than go to war. War should be the very, very, very last option. We should exhaust all other approaches before we go to war, but that did not seem to be the case with the Republican candidates.
It sounds like you still have regrets about your Iraq war vote. I wonder if that creates an opening for Senator Sanders and others to question your foreign policy decisions.
Well, that's up to people to decide. I've said that I was wrong, and I certainly am willing to not only admit that, but to point out that I think working with the Obama administration, we did exercise the kind of smart power that I think needs to be the hallmark of our security policy. So I think I am very well prepared and very grounded in what will work in dealing in a very complicated world. This is a multi-polar, challenging world that we have to get right on so many different fronts, and I think I bring a level of understanding and experience to the race that would do me well in the White House. Let me deal with Iran, and then I can go to other threats. I support the agreement that the president has put forth, and I feel strongly about it. As Secretary of State, I negotiated the sanctions that gave us the leverage to begin the preliminary discussions because we imposed enough economic pressure on Iran. And I believe that this agreement will, if vigorously enforced, which I would certainly do as president, would put the lid on Iran's nuclear weapons program for a number of years and would give us more flexibility in dealing with the other threats that Iran presents. So I will be, first in line to say that it's not a perfect agreement, but those are hard to come by, here on this earth anyway. And so therefore, we have to look at what the alternatives are, and by any standard, it is far better than any of the alternatives, either walking away, losing the pressure we put into place through the sanctions, and basically allowing Iran to pursue a nuclear weapons program. Having said that, Iran's other behavior continues to pose a threat in the Middle East, destabilizing governments, threatening Israel, exporting terrorism. And therefore, I think we do have to put together a similar coalition to try to rein in Iran's other actions that are destabilizing and dangerous. I believe I can do that because it was not easy when the president asked me to be Secretary of State, and he and I first started talking about all the threats we faced. We inherited the following. It was under George W. Bush that the Iranians mastered the nuclear fuel cycle. It was under George W. Bush that the Iranians built covert facilities. It was under George W. Bush that they stocked those facilities with centrifuges and got them spinning. So when we began to work on this, the president and I looked at each other and said, American sanctions alone are never going to bring Iran to the negotiating table. We've tried that. I voted for every sanction I could when I was a senator from New York. So that's when, I began to travel extensively, meeting with our negotiating partners, including China and Russia, to make the case for international sanctions. It took about 18 months. In June of 2010, we were able to get those sanctions passed by the Security Council. That's when the pressure began to build on the Iranians. And then I spent another good year traveling around,
convincing countries to follow the sanctions. Because, if you're far, far away from the Middle East, if you're in Japan or South Korea and you're hungry for energy, you kind of say, well, what difference would it make if I buy a little oil or gas from Iran? And we had to be really tough in saying to our friends and our allies and others, it makes a big difference. We're trying to avoid a war, and we're trying to avoid Iran having a nuclear weapon, so you've got to work with us on this. And they did, and the pressure built. And then I began to put together the preliminary talks that led to the negotiations. And I think the President and Secretary Kerry and Secretary Moniz have done a great job. And so we've got this chance now I do think that we're in a very dangerous moment in the Middle East, as there often are. We have collapsing regimes like Assad in Syria. We have seen what has happened with Iraq. The Iraqis themselves really abandoned the opportunity they were given by the United States to have a military that was non-sectarian, that would include the Sunnis and the Kurds in a force that would protect Iraq. And instead, the prior Prime Minister, Maliki, began to eviscerate the military that the United States had trained. Now, I do think it's, a little bit surprising to hear Jeb Bush talk about this. He expects the American people to have a collective case of amnesia, and particularly the fact that George W. Bush signed the agreement with Maliki setting the withdrawal date of the end of 2011. Something else we inherited. And when we got there, and I tried, I know others tried, to make the case that the Iraqis could not go it alone yet, that they needed continuing intelligence help and surveillance and training support. Maliki wasn't interested, and he had the agreement signed by George W. Bush, and he just wanted the American troops gone so he could go about his merry business of undermining the country that he was supposed to lead. So I think the situation is in many ways a very dangerous one because of the rise of ISIS, which largely took advantage of what was going on in Syria to conquer and hold territory and then to cross the border into Iraq. But I support what the President is doing now. We will help train. We will help provide air power. We will be there to back up Iraqi forces, Turkish assets to try to deal with ISIS, but we are not going to send American troops back to Iraq. So and finally, just let me quickly say, Putin and Russia, troubling. How many of you have seen the last season of House of Cards? I mean, he's a lot taller than Putin, but the actor playing him, based on my experience negotiating with and being with Putin, is right on the money. It's really quite remarkable. China's moves in the South China Sea are something we have to watch carefully, and their territorial demands vis-a-vis other countries, Vietnam, Japan, etc. North Korea remains always a threat because they have a nuclear weapons program, and they are developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, not to our level of sophistication, but they're determined to get, to Hawaii if they can. So that is something we have to keep a close look on. A lot of the unrest and the conflict in Africa is in and of itself terrible because no people have in the last 20 years suffered more than Africans have from conflicts, 5.5 million people killed in Congo. And so we have a serious challenge to try to help resolve those conflicts and prevent terrorist groups from, taking hold in any of those areas like Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab or others. But on balance, we have a lot more opportunities than threats and dangers. And I think we need to be looking at how we are going to lead in the 21st century, leading with our values, leading with our interests, protecting our security and that of our allies, friends, and partners. And I would just close by saying, I went to 112 countries as your Secretary of State, and I came away with two overriding convictions. One, no matter what they say about us, most people wish they were here, not there. And so part of it is living up to our own ideals, making it absolutely clear we're going to continue to provide economic opportunity and equality and deal with our problems here at home, unlike places that just ignore them. We've got problems. Hopefully, we will tend to those problems, and that's been one of our great strengths. And then the other is the alternative to American leadership is not somebody else's leadership, it is nobody's. And that makes the world a very dangerous place. If you don't have the United States leading, whether it's feeding people, dealing with Ebola and other diseases, trying to move us forward against climate change, whatever the serious global issue might be, in the absence of American leadership, it will not get done. So I will be a president who will lead based on our best values and ideals, but I will lead our country for this century.
What you're seeing now is a revolution in this country, in many respects, in trying to create a less discriminatory society. And when, we have discussed, and Tom and I talk about every week, the very, very, very serious problems facing our country in terms of income and wealth inequality and high unemployment and poverty and all that. Very, very serious problems. On the other hand, we are making good progress in trying to become a society where people are not punished because of their race or their sexual orientation. But clearly we have a long way to go. So I think that those Supreme Court justices who are trying to defend discrimination in terms of gay rights will have a legacy that is not particularly good. And I think those folks who, for 30 or 40 years, this program started with my old friend Ellen Ratner, talking about her struggles for 40 years advancing gay rights, will be looked in the future as real heroes and heroines in the fight for equality in America.
Well, first, as president, I will do everything I can to make sure that marriage equality is enforced. It's the law of the land, and it needs to be enforced across our country. And then we have to tackle the discrimination issues. When I was in the Senate, was one of the senators, sponsoring what was called ENDA, a bill to end discrimination against the LGBT community. And we have a lot of work to do there. There's just so much continuing discrimination and bias, and I particularly worry about young people because there is a lot of misunderstanding and even mistreatment still today by families of young people who are LGBT, and they're hoping to be accepted, and they are not, and they find themselves on the streets. I know you've got people in Las Vegas who are homeless on the streets, who are young LGBT people who have had to leave home. So we need more services, we need more support, and we all need to be speaking out in favor of treating these young people with respect and dignity and giving them a chance. And I hope that as president, I will not only be able to speak to that, but demonstrate how we do it, and then support laws that will make it easier for a lot of our people, particularly the young people.
Well, actually, if you check it out, the last rating I got from the NRA, to the best of my knowledge, was an F. That doesn't quite make me a gun nut. In my state of Vermont, we're a very rural state. What guns are about are hunting, target practice, antique guns, and we have a pretty low crime rate. But I do believe, obviously, that nationally, guns in Baltimore and guns in Los Angeles are very different. I have voted against the importation of assault weapons, and I understand that not every part of America is the state of Vermont. But let me just talk about guns for a moment. We have been yelling and screaming at each other about guns for decades with very little success. I come from a state that has virtually no gun control. But the people of my state understand, I think pretty clearly, that guns in Vermont are not the same thing as guns in Chicago or guns in Los Angeles. In our state, guns are used for hunting. In Chicago, they're used for kids in gangs killing other kids or people shooting at police officers, shooting down innocent people. We need a sensible debate about gun control which overcomes the cultural divide that exists in this country. And I think I can play an important role in this. I voted to ban a semi-automatic assault weapons. I voted to make sure that there's an instant background check. I voted to make sure that guns do not get into the hands of people who should not have them by doing away with the loophole that exists in the gun show legislation. Virtually every campaign that I have been in where the NRA and the gun folks have had a position, they voted and supported, opposed me. In fact, I have about a D- record from the NRA. Now, the issues that you're talking about is if somebody has a gun and it falls into the hands of a murderer and that murderer kills somebody with the gun, do you hold the gun manufacturer responsible? Not any more than you would hold a hammer company responsible if somebody beats somebody over the head with a hammer. That is not what a lawsuit should be about. And this is part, by the way, I may say, of, folks who do not like guns is fine. But we have millions of people who are gun owners in this country. 99.9% of those people obey the law. I want to see real serious debate and action on guns. But it is not going to take place if we simply have extreme positions on both sides. I think I can bring us to the middle.
And this is very important. It's important for states like New Hampshire and Vermont and rural states all over this country. So let me be very clear about it. There are, in my state and in your state, tens of thousands of people who own guns, who hunt, who do target practice, and go to antique gun shows. 99.9% of those people are law-abiding people. And I respect, and we should all respect, different lifestyles. That is a lifestyle that I respect. I have seen and been with families, mom, dad, and kids go out into the woods, they enjoy nature, and that is what they do. And they should not be condemned, and they should not be stigmatized. I think, frankly, that I can play a very good role in the debate over gun control for the following reasons. I come from a state which has virtually no gun control at all. None. And so I have to tell you, it took a little bit of courage on my part to vote for a ban on assault weapons. To vote for instant background checks. To vote to end this gun show loophole, all right, which is a very serious problem. I voted for all of those things. And not everybody in my state agreed with me. But here's what I think. I may be wrong, but this is what I think. I think in states like Vermont, New Hampshire, and rural states all over this country, where people do hunt, where people do own guns, what people also understand here in Vermont is that guns in our part of the world, and in my state, thank God, we have a very low crime rate and relatively few instances of people using guns to kill people. Thank God. But what people in Vermont, and I suspect New Hampshire, understand is that guns in our part of the world are very different than guns in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. Guns in Chicago mean that young people who are in gangs are killing other young people or shooting at police officers or involved in the drug trade. Very different understanding of guns and reality of guns in those areas than in rural areas. What we have got to do, and I think honestly I'm in a pretty good position to do, is to come forward with a common sense proposal on guns that will have the support of not of everybody, but of a significant majority of the American people. For example, Not too many people in America believe that we should allow guns to get into the hands, frankly, of people who should not have them, right? All right? Who disagrees with it? It's hard to disagree with that. You know, we know people who are suicidal, who are homicidal. They should not have guns. People who have criminal records should not have guns. People who have come out of psychiatric institutes should not have guns. I hope and I believe that in America there's not much debate about that. So we need an instant background check. I would hope that that is widely supported. Now, your point about assault weapons, I agree with that also. Hunters, vast majority of hunters, do not use semi-assault weapons when they hunt, all right? They don't need it. And they don't have magazines that can shoot 30 bullets at a time. So I would hope that as a nation we would ban these types of assault weapons so they don't get into the hands of people who are gun dealers or out shooting at police officers. I would hope that we can agree on that. And I hope that we could agree that it's stupid to have loopholes so that if you went to a gun show, you could buy all the guns you need without a background check. That doesn't make sense. So these, among others, and I'm open to other ideas, but here is the point. People in urban America cannot demonize or stereotype people in rural America because they own guns and they hunt. People in rural America who hunt have got to understand that guns in Chicago and LA mean a very different thing than guns in Vermont and New Hampshire. And if we can come to that understanding and cross this cultural divide, we can finally come up with common sense gun solutions that the vast majority of the American people will support.
It's important. It's been important to me for a long time because I think there is a very clear path to protecting the rights of gun owners and following the Second Amendment while doing more to keep guns out of the hands of people that should not have them. And I feel very strongly about that. To me, it's a critical safety issue, and we've seen too many mass shootings in our country, and we've seen too many of the kind of tragedies that you had here just last month. So I am strongly supporting it and hoping that we can make some progress on this issue.
I feel so strongly that we are way out of balance here. I want to do what I can as president and to support states and cities to have some common sense violence prevention, gun regulations and laws. Now here in Nevada, you'll have a chance to vote on an initiative next in the 2016 election, right? And I hope that you will all take that very seriously. You see, I don't see any conflict between the legitimate protection of Second Amendment rights and protecting people from gun violence from people who should never have guns in the first place. And all the surveys I've shown show that a majority of Americans and a majority of gun owners support universal background checks. And not just the checks, but getting them to work. You know, that young man who murdered those 9 people at Bible study in the church in Charleston should never have gotten that gun. They were waiting on the information, and 3 days went by, and under the rules he got to get the gun. But at what cost? That young man murdered in a church 9 good people who welcomed him in to be part of their prayers. And you could go through all of the other mass killings, but it's also important to remember a lot of them don't make headlines anymore. The domestic violence cases, the random shootings. I mean, a man was with his grandchildren in one of our national parks. He was making s'mores. You know what s'mores are? The graham crackers and the marshmallows and the chocolate over the campfire. People just shooting for the heck of it, who weren't educated, who weren't responsible. A straight bullet killed him as he sat at the campfire with his grandchildren. So I guess I will do whatever I can. I am not afraid of this fight. I am not backing off from this fight because it has gone way too far in one direction and we need to get back to some balance. Well, as you know, most of the stand your ground laws are state and local laws, right? But I think we could do more at the federal level to work with states, work with law enforcement, work with communities to point out that, yes, there is a role in extreme situations to defend yourself and defend your home. But unfortunately, what we've seen too much of in the last few years is a spate of people who have reached for a gun before they really figured out what was going on. They've been much too eager to use that gun. We've seen it with policing, and we've seen it with civilians. And it is something that I think, I've thought a lot about it. I don't understand it exactly, but I think, you know, the media today gets everybody whipped up about stuff. And I think a lot of people are living with a level of fear and insecurity that is not necessarily realistic, and therefore they get on, we would say, a trigger's edge, and they go for their guns instead of saying, why is this happening, and what more can we do? And certainly the police, first and foremost, they need to be trained and held accountable and disciplined in a way that prevents the sort of reaction that we've seen way too much of. And with civilians, I just think a lot of these stand your ground laws need to be rewritten so that, yes, if somebody is breaking into your home and you are in imminent danger, or you go to your door and you see something that is deeply concerning, well, first thing you should do is call 911. But the second thing, if you have to defend yourself, okay. But look at some of the instances we've had. Trayvon Martin, look at that. That was absolutely hard for me to understand. The young man who was shot in the car because the music he was playing was too loud. I mean, what is going on there? That wasn't stand your ground. That was just an overreaction. That was a kind of, knee-jerk reaction by somebody who had that gun. So we could go through the list. I don't know what the laws are here in Nevada, but I think that every state needs to take a hard look. Nobody should want to create circumstances in which innocent, unarmed people are killed, either by law enforcement or by civilians wielding guns. And we've got to figure out how to deal with that.
First of all, I was so just stricken to think that these two young people doing the work that you guys do every single day would be murdered on live television. And I will extend my condolences and sympathies to their families and to their co-workers and pray for the woman who, last I checked, was still in critical condition. But I will also reiterate, we have got to do something about gun violence in America. And I will take it on. There are many people who face it and know it, but then turn away because it's hard. It's a very political, difficult issue in America. But I believe we are smart enough, we are compassionate enough to figure out how to balance the legitimate Second Amendment rights with preventive measures and control measures so that whatever motivated this murderer, who eventually took his own life, we will not see more deaths, needless, senseless deaths. So yes, I feel just great heartache at what happened, and I want to reiterate how important it is we not let yet another terrible instance go by without trying to do something more to prevent this incredible killing that is stalking our country. And we've had so many terrible instances of it in the last 2 years. But it happens every day. Intentional, unintentional, murder, suicide, it happens every day. And there is so much evidence that if guns were not so readily available, if we had universal background checks, if we could just put some time out between the person who's upset because he got fired or the domestic abuse or whatever other motivation may be working on someone who does this, that maybe we could prevent this kind of carnage. So I hope that in addition to expressing sympathy for those directly affected, that this is maybe for the media, for the public, for elected officials, for every American, what it hopefully will finally take for us to act. Thanks.
Sometimes, events happen and you just don't forget them, and this was one. I was the first member of the U.S. House to take people across the Canadian border, and the people were from northern Vermont. We took a busload of people. They were mostly women, working class women who were dealing with breast cancer, and some of them were using a drug called tamoxifen. And I'll never forget this. We went across the border, and we had arranged for all of this, went into a pharmacy in Montreal. Women were buying that particular drug for 10% of the price that they were paying in the United States of America.
Why?
And tears were coming out of their eyes when they paid for that. Because the pharmaceutical industry in this country is one of the most powerful lobbying forces. Very wealthy, very powerful. Every other major country, including Canada and throughout Europe, negotiates drug prices because they have national health care systems. So they're not going to pay top-of-the-line prices. And in this country right now, because of the power of the pharmaceutical industry, you walk into a drugstore tomorrow to get your medicine, price could be double what it is today. There are no regulations. They can charge you any price they want, and they do. And now it's not only brand name drugs, they're moving aggressively in terms of generic drugs, which are also skyrocketing. So the bottom line is the pharmaceutical industry can do anything it wants, and it is a horrific situation because I talk to doctors who work in working class communities. They say 25% of their patients cannot afford to fill the prescriptions that the doctors are writing. What sense is that? So that is an issue I've been on for a long time. We have got to regulate the pharmaceutical industry. They cannot continue to charge us the highest prices in the world. It was a very significant piece of legislation. And here's what, I am a great believer in epidemiology. And that is what we want to ascertain is what are the factors that will give people in one country, which result in people in one country coming down with more types of disease than people in another country? Why do farmers who may be handling chemicals or fertilizers come down with a higher rate of cancer or other illnesses than somebody working in an office? Why do people in the Northeast perhaps come down with problems that people in the Southwest will not have? There's a lot to be learned about environmental factors and other factors in terms of the causation, not just of cancer, but of disease in general. So if you look at the international information, you find that rates of breast cancer fluctuate significantly all over the world. Why is that? What can we learn? So that was why I did that.
What did you learn?
I learned that that there are reasons. I mean, we're still studying it. I'm not a scientist, but that there are reasons why certain people in certain parts of the world come down with illness rather than other people. And I think that chemicals and environmental exposures have an impact.
We are, as you know, the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. I live 100 miles away from Canada. They do it. We spend almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other country. So what we want to do is expand on Medicare. Medicare is a popular, good system. It covers people who are old. I want to see Medicare cover everybody. A Medicare for all single-payer program is the way, in my view, that you provide universal, quality, cost-effective health care, and we join the rest of the industrialized world.
What we should understand, and I fear that not every American does understand this, we are the only major, wealthy, industrialized country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all of our people as a right. The system that we have is way, way, way out of touch with where the rest of the world is. So what I will fight for
is a Medicare for all. Medicare is a pretty good system. We can improve it, and we should expand it to all people. And when you do that, not only will you provide quality health care to all of our people, you will get rid of the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies. Drug companies are charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And when we do that, we can provide quality care for all of our people at significantly less per capita than we are currently spending. So that's my goal in terms of health care.
And the reason I'm talking about mental health, mental illness, is because people in Iowa talk to me about it. When I started my campaign back in April, and first place I went was Davenport, then I traveled across the state, ended up in Council Bluffs. There were two issues people raised with me that honestly, as I was planning to run, I care about them, but I didn't know that they'd be high priorities. One, substance abuse, and the epidemic of meth and pills and heroin, and the fact that we've had more deaths by overdoses last year than automobile accidents. And the second, untreated mental health. And I've been talking about it everywhere. I had a town hall in Keene, New Hampshire just 2 days ago. The whole subject was substance abuse and the related issues of mental health. It was a great big cafeteria. The place was packed, standing room only, and people told their stories. They told their stories about not getting help. They told their stories about what happens when they sought treatment and there was nowhere forward, or they were put on a 6-month waiting list. I have criticized your governor for vetoing a bipartisan agreement to keep the 4 facilities that are in, as I understand it, the Iowa Code, 4 facilities in different parts of the state to care for people with mental health challenges. And the Republicans and the Democrats agreed that those 2 places should be kept open, not shut, and the governor vetoed that. Now, I read in the Des Moines Register, and I checked on it, because it was such a shocking statistic. They started transferring people, some of whom have been there for years, some of whom are schizophrenic, severely depressed, other kinds of problems. They started moving people into private facilities, and 3 of them have died since being moved. Is that right? You know, this is wrong. This is just wrong. I don't know how else to say it. It's just wrong. First of all, there should be no difference between physical health and mental health. And we're going to learn we're going to learn a lot more as we unlock the secrets of the brain and the genome and how our body is one big, operating system. We're going to learn more about why some people are vulnerable and other people aren't. And it should not be a stigma. If I had a man at this town hall that I did in Keene, New Hampshire say to me, if my son had cancer, everybody would be coming up to me and telling me how sorry they are and what can they do and how is he and what's the prognosis. But if my son has schizophrenia, people don't even want to talk to me. They don't ask. They don't know what to say. So I've had some people question why running for president, I'm talking a lot about mental health. Well, because people talk to me about it. And I think a president should try to help people have better lives, help families be stronger, create more opportunities for all Americans. And I'm going to do everything I can to come up with a better approach to treating mental health problems.
First, I will defend the Affordable Care Act. I give President Obama a lot of credit for getting it passed. As some of you might remember, I tried that back in 93, 94, and I still have the scars to show for it, so I'm going to be defending it.
but I also want to improve it. And one of the areas it needs improving on is prescription drug costs. The costs are going up. And there are a couple of issues here. Let me just sort of summarize it by saying we need to do a better job negotiating the cost of drugs. Insurance companies, Medicare need to do that. And one of our problems is, the pharmaceutical companies are very powerful. And so far they have avoided having to negotiate their prices with Medicare, which is the single biggest payer for drugs. And I'm going to do everything I can to change that. Because it's wrong that I admit a lot of these drugs are expensive, the research is expensive, I get that. But let me tell you that the American taxpayer pays for a lot of the research that serves as the basis for the drugs being developed. We often pay for, to some extent, clinical trials, and we pay for the Food and Drug Administration, which tells you whether or not this drug can be put onto the market. So we have a big investment as American taxpayers, and then the drug companies sell it all over the world, and in advanced economies like Canada and Europe and Japan and places like that, they negotiate the prices. And then it comes to Medicare, and we don't have a law to do that. So it's going to be one of my highest priorities. I think the whole country is learning a lot more than we did know or understand before. So I think a lot of the issues you're raising are going to have to be dealt with. And certainly as we negotiate with insurance companies and look for, the kinds of health care that people need, all those issues have to be taken into account. I will certainly do my part the best I can as president to make sure that no child, no young person is refused the care that he or she needs. And I thank you for sharing that story with us.
I think economically and morally, it is unacceptable that we have millions of workers who are living in the shadows. And by the way, I'm also the son of an immigrant. My dad came from Poland at the age of 17.
I heard.
Without any money at all. Here's a story. I was just in Louisiana, New Orleans, just on Sunday, actually. At the end of my remarks, a group of young Latino kids came up to me. Beautiful young lady, maybe 16, 17, tears in her eyes, saying that she is scared to death every day that she or a member of her family will be deported. Okay. So you have the moral issue of 11 million people in this country who are undocumented. Some of my Republican colleagues apparently think that the solution is, I guess, in the middle of the night, throw them out of the country. I mean, I think that anyone is thinking about those kinds of ideas is ugly beyond belief. Clearly, what we have got to do is provide comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. Now, that is not only the right thing to do for those people in this country, but to your point, economically, it is the right thing to do. When people, workers who are undocumented, have no rights, when they're not getting the benefits and the taxes that they're paying, it impacts the whole economy to the tune of many, many, many billions of dollars. And let us also be clear on 2 points. Maybe you agree with me on this one, maybe you don't. The first point is, I'm sure you do agree with me, if suddenly every undocumented worker in this country disappeared, the economy would collapse, especially in agriculture.
Absolutely.
We all know that, all right? No great secret, it would collapse. And in many other areas, construction. The second area is, people talk about illegal immigrants. Well, there's such a thing as illegal employers as well. People do not come over the border and get jobs without the full expectation that their employer understands exactly what's going on, will pay them under the table, and in fact exploit them. And I find it very interesting that many of my law and order friends politicians ignore that simple reality. So to your point, the economy becomes stronger when people have legal status, when people do not have to worry about being picked up and deported, where families are separated. The economy becomes stronger when people are part of our workforce, earning decent wages, spending money, holding their heads up high. So I believe as quickly as possible that we should provide legal status to undocumented workers. I think our policy should be to bring families together, not separate them. I applaud President Obama's actions, executive actions. I think we probably want to go further. We certainly, in the long run, need to demand that the Republicans in Congress stop turning their backs on this issue and pass comprehensive immigration reform. Well, there's a very significant difference in scope of what the recent bill does compared to what that bill does. My concern about the bill that I voted against has to do with exactly what Javier and I discussed a few moments ago. And that is that there was too much emphasis on bringing low-wage workers into this country, okay? What I want to see and what is better about the recent bill is, number one, that there is a path towards citizenship, which is absolutely essential. And second of all, that I was able to get a fairly significant amount of money into providing jobs for young people in this country. And that is the difference between, among other things, those two pieces of legislation. Well, you got to be careful about defining the word immigrants. What they are talking about is completely opening up the border. That was the question. Should we have a completely open border so that anybody can come into the United States of America? If that were to happen, which I strongly disagree with, there is no question in my mind that that would substantially lower wages in this country. When you have 36% of Hispanic kids in this country who can't find jobs, and you bring a lot of unskilled workers into this country, what do you think happens to that 36% of kids who are today unemployed? 51% of African American kids. I don't think there's any candidate for president, none, who thinks that we should open up the borders and not see that as having a negative impact. So to my mind is, what do we do and how do we address the problem of 11 million undocumented people in this country today? We move aggressively toward a path toward citizenship. We move as fast as we can to legal status. We provide protection for those people. But to simply open the borders of America, do you think there is any candidate for president who thinks that that makes sense? I don't think so. Nor do I. Do I think that illegal immigration should be restricted? No, I don't. No. The question that I was asked is essentially an open borders. And I certainly do not agree with it. My father was an immigrant. Immigrants have built this country. Javier's dad was an immigrant? Yeah. That is one of the virtues of America, that we have people coming from all over the world with their own particular set of skills and ideas. That is what makes America a unique country on earth, something that we should be very, very proud of. But there is a great difference in saying that we welcome immigrants, that we're going to provide a path towards citizenship for those people and those families that are in this country today, than saying, oh, we're not going to have any borders at all.
I think we agree on one more thing, that immigrants make America more American.
They do. That is a huge part of what makes this country great.
Well, he doesn't believe in a path to citizenship. If he did at one time, he no longer does. And so pretty much they're, as I said, they're on a spectrum of hostility, which I think is really regrettable in a nation of immigrants like ours, all the way to kind of grudging acceptance but refusal to go with a pathway to citizenship. I think that's a mistake. I think that we know we're not going to deport 11 or 12 million people. We shouldn't be breaking up families. We shouldn't be stopping people from having the opportunity to be fully integrated legally within our country. It's good for us. It's good economically. It's good for the taxes that will be legally collected. It's good for the children so that they can go as far as their hard work and talent will take them. So I am 100% behind comprehensive immigration reform that includes a path to citizenship. Well, what should be done is any city should listen to the Department of Homeland Security, which, as I understand it, urged them to deport this man again after he got out of prison another time. You know, here's a case where we've deported. He ends back up in our country, and I think the city made a mistake. The city made a mistake not to deport someone that the federal government strongly felt should be deported. So I have absolutely no support for a city that ignores the strong evidence that should be acted on. However, there are, like, if it were the first-time traffic citation, if it were something minor, a misdemeanor, that's entirely different. This man had already been deported 5 times, and he should have been deported at the request of the federal government.
I support comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship, not some other status. And, you know, I have supported that for a long time. I supported the efforts that Senator Ted Kennedy made when I was in the Senate to try to bring about immigration reform. I supported the Dreamers. I supported a lot of the efforts to try to have a more rational, sensible immigration policy. And I was very encouraged when in 2010, before the midterm election, the Senate passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform package, and then the House would not bring it up for a vote, which I think was a real missed opportunity. So I'm ready to defend that position and advocate for it, because we are not, and we should not even think about deporting 11, 12 million people living and working here. That is wrong, and it is not something that the United States would ever do, even though some people advocate for it. They know better, but they think it gets them, votes or attention. I think, secondly, there is no doubt in my mind that our labor market would be fairer to everybody, including non-immigrant Americans, if we had comprehensive immigration reform, because you would have people who would no longer be exploitable. I mean, in town halls and other meetings, I've had people say, my cousin was working construction and then he lost his job to immigrants, and, that's not right. It's not right. And why did it happen? Because those people can be exploited. They can be paid, or in lots of instances, not even paid. They can put in a week of work, and nothing happens to them when they don't get paid. The employers are gone. They're not the laws are not enforced. They can be in very dangerous, unsafe working conditions. So my response is, if we legalize and have a path to citizenship that begins to break down the difference between undocumented, exploitable workers and everybody else, it will be good for everybody. It will be good for the people who are here, they're citizens, they want those jobs too, and now they can compete because you won't be able to do it under the table, so to speak.
In the last budget, again, I'm a little obsessed with it because I was on the floor 5 days with it.
Right.
Republicans threw 27 million people off of health insurance. That's a fact, okay? By ending the Affordable Care Act and cutting Medicaid by $440 billion.
Well, they're proposing ending it. It's still a law.
Absolutely. Right. Okay, absolutely.
Right.
Do you think it's worth a headline in America that says Republican Party's budget throws 27 million people off of health care?
I think that most people in the media would tell you that they might not use exactly those words, but the fact of their proposal to end the Affordable Care Act and therefore end the health insurance of X number of people, that to me seems like a legitimate thing to be reported.
How many people have seen that, do you think? Anybody seen that? Give you another example. And again, I don't want to beat up on the media. I'm diverting a little bit from your good questions. We can argue about whether we like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Look, we can argue about that. I don't like it. I've been against American trade policies. I think it's one of the reasons that wages have gone down and jobs have gone abroad. Be that as it may, the last study that I saw, may have changed, has anybody said that on the major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, there has not been one word of discussion about the largest trade agreement in the history of America? Do you think that makes sense? How does that happen? So what I'm saying is that when we talk about a political revolution in America, which is what I believe we need. It needs to raise public consciousness, to have elections not in which 36% of the people vote, but where 80 or 90% of the people vote. A poll done last year, they asked the American people, can you tell me which political party controls the U.S. Senate and U.S. House? 63% of the American people couldn't answer that
nobody
question.
knows anything on that stuff, right?
All right.
Yeah.
But how do we have a vibrant democracy where government works for the people if people don't know which party controls the House or the Senate?
But we can agree that that's the problem. We might not agree on what the solution to the problem
Well, one of the solutions is that we have a media which focuses on the real issues facing the American people, holds political parties and candidates accountable, rather than does political gossip. That's one thing that we can do.
I don't think that's unreasonable. But I would also say, Senator, that Republicans have figured out how to go around the filter and go directly to voters, and maybe Democrats need to do a better job of doing the same thing.
I think you're absolutely right about that.
Right,
and I'll tell you where I see really a lot of optimism. And this is an advertisement. Sanders.senate.gov. Got it? We have a very active website. We will have soon about 1 million people who are part of our Facebook effort. We have more people on Facebook than any other member of the Senate, precisely for those reasons. That I think we have got to figure out mechanisms to get directly to people.
It's direct democracy.
Exactly.
The frustration is that in all the years I've been in Congress, it's true, not one person in the media came up to me and said, Bernie, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. What are you going to do about it? Bernie, we have 11% of our people unemployed today. How are you going to put those people back to work? Bernie, are you worried that so few people have so much political power? What are you going to do about that? Those are questions I don't hear very much about. So in terms of, I don't know a whole lot about, I know what you know, what you read in the newspapers about the emails. I really don't know what the rules are in terms of the Department of State. But frankly, from the calls I just mentioned, asked my person at the front desk, how many calls are we getting on Hillary's emails? You know what the answer was in Washington, D.C.? 0. Not one of the major issues facing me. No, I would not be running, I do politics. Again, people in Vermont understand this. I don't. The rest of the country doesn't. A little bit differently than other people do. You're looking at somebody who's run in many, many elections. In the House for 16 years, 8 elections. In the Senate, twice, lost some elections. Do you know how many negative ads I've run during all those years? Not one. Never ran a negative ad. So I don't run against people. It's not my desire to trash people. Hillary Clinton is a remarkable woman with an extraordinary history of public service. Wouldn't it not be my job to run against her? It would be my job, if she ran and if I ran, to debate the serious issues facing our country, as intelligent people should be doing in a democracy. And let me say this, again, this is how I always get myself in trouble, and I'm getting my wife nervous already. But we can't have that serious debate if the media doesn't allow it. So I would urge my media friends that instead of political gossip, let us talk about the real issues and respect different points of view. But when 63% of the people in a poll last year didn't know which political parties controlled the House and the Senate, something is wrong with political consciousness in this country. So what we need is civil, intelligent debates on the real issues facing the American people. Not more political gossip of who's winning today and who's losing, who slipped on a banana peel, who said something particularly stupid. Sure, I did today, it'll be, but let it be. How do we rebuild a crumbling middle class? How do we lead the world in transforming our energy system so we can save the planet from climate change? How do we do with a grotesque level? How do we deal with the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality? Not easy stuff. How do we do it? Those are the issues that serious people should be talking about.
I can only tell you, Brianna, that this has been a theme that has been used against me and my husband for many, many years. And at the end of the day, I think voters sort it all out. I have great confidence. I trust the American voter. So I trust the American voter 100% because I think, the American voter will weigh these kinds of accusations. I mean, people write books filled with unsubstantiated attacks against us and even admit they have no evidence. But of course, it's your job to cover it. So of course, that's going to raise questions in people's minds. But during the course of this campaign, just as in my 2 prior campaigns and in my other years of service, I have a lot of confidence that the American people can sort it all out.
If you have listened to me on the campaign trail or in the halls of the United States Senate and on the floor there, you would know that I helped lead the opposition against NAFTA when I was in the House and against CAFTA, against permanent normal trade relations with China, and I'm currently helping to lead the effort against this disastrous TPP. It is clear to me that all of these trade agreements were written by multinational corporations, Wall Street, the drug companies, with the goal of making it easier for them to shut down in America and move abroad. And that's what they've done. We have lost something like 60,000 factories since 2001, millions of decent-paying jobs. So yes, to answer your question, my view is we need a fundamentally new direction in trade. Trade is a good thing, not a bad thing. But trade policies have got to work for the workers of this country and the workers abroad, not just for the CEOs of large corporations who can make huge profits by shutting down here and exploiting poor people in developing countries. So the answer to your question is this is a hugely important issue, something I feel very strongly about, and yes, we will revise significantly our current trade policies. Essentially, what this fast-track authority was about is to say, okay, you have an agreement right now, which is essentially completed. What you now have is the authority to get an agreement with 11 other countries. And then once that agreement is agreed upon by all 12 countries, it will come back to the Congress, and there will not be any amendments allowed. There will not be any, it'll be a 50-vote situation in the House, not a 60-vote, and the president cannot change it because then it would have to go back to the 11 other countries and the whole process would continue. So to answer your question, to the best of my knowledge, the answer is no. Once the president concludes negotiations and has an agreement, it comes to the Senate, comes to the House, up and down vote, no amendments, and he signs it.
And Javier, please do not understand my position as being something that we put a wall around America and we don't trade. Trade is a good thing.
Okay.
The question is what kind of trade agreements do we establish, who benefits from those trade agreements. Now, I voted, when I first got into Congress, 1991, at that period NAFTA came up. I voted against NAFTA. I voted against CAFTA. I voted against permanent normal trade relations with China. And you're quite right. I'm helping to lead the opposition against the TPP. Why? What I have always believed, and I think the facts bear me out, is number one, these trade agreements were essentially written by corporate America, the big money interest, by Wall Street, by the pharmaceutical industry. They were not written with the goal of improving life for people in the United States of America. Essentially, what they were written to do was to say to large corporations, okay, you do not have to pay workers in this country 15, 20, 25 bucks an hour. You can shut down in America. You can move to China, you can move to Vietnam, you can move to Mexico. You can pay people substantially lower wages, and you bring your products back into America. I believe that that was the intention of these pieces of legislation, and I believe that that is exactly what has happened. Two things. Since 2001, we have lost almost 60,000 factories in America, and I'm not going to tell you all of that is attributable to trade, but a lot of it is. And second of all, we are in a race to the bottom. So that now companies say to workers, well, you know, if you don't take a pay cut, we're going to go to China because we have that opportunity in China. So I believe in trade, but not unfettered free trade. Frankly, I do not believe that American workers should be forced to compete against workers around the world who make pennies an hour. I think that that is unfair. And I can go on longer. I don't want to go on longer. The TPP has additional provisions in it which I do not like. So what I want to see is a trade agreement which works for the middle class and working families of this country as well as people around the world, not just for the CEOs of large corporations. Nope. I am anti that philosophy of trade agreements. I am anti a trade agreement which results in jobs being lost in America. And let's be clear, we have lost millions of jobs as a result of these trade agreements. I am against that. But I believe we can establish trade policies that work for small business, that work for workers in our country, work for people in other countries. But that has not been the philosophy behind the trade agreements that I have seen in the last 20 years.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. Trade is essential for American agriculture, and no place knows that better than Iowa. And in the overview that I gave of my proposal, I said that we need trade, but we need trade that meets the three criteria that I've laid out. That it, protects American jobs, it grows the economy, and it also advances our national security. And that's why I am focused on looking for how we make trade work better for all aspects of our economy. But I am well aware of how critical trade is for American agriculture, and I'm going to do everything I can as president to make sure, regardless of what trade agreements we have, that American farmers get a really good shot at new markets and new opportunities. And I think we'll have some ways of doing that. And in my longer description of these policies that I overviewed today, you can see more about what I mean.
I think you say to somebody, for example, who's opposed to gay marriage, we use that as an example. You say, okay, look, you're making $22,000 a year. You can't afford to send your kid to college. You can't afford childcare for your young kid. You may or may not have health insurance, and if you do have health insurance, you're paying too much for that health insurance. Your friend's job just went to China, and your dad lost his job at the age of 50 because he was replaced by somebody who was 22 years of age at much lower wages. So you disagree with me on gay marriage, and you disagree with me on abortion. I respect that. But can't we come together to fight for an economy so that your kids have a fair shot at doing well in society? That's the message that you make. Now, the guy may say, well, I can't because I am so anti-gay that while you're right on health care and you may be right on the economy, and that will happen. But I think what I have seen in the state of Vermont, my own state where I know best, is that people will disagree with me on the abortion issue, will disagree with me on gay marriage and say, look, Bernie, I disagree with you on that. Yep. But I know you're standing up and you're fighting for me and my kids on these basic economic
So you think Democrats need to go to places where they've not found votes, where they don't have a lot of agreement on issues, and make the case regardless?
Absolutely.
This is the old 50-state strategy your former governor, Howard Dean,
that's right.
Howard was the architect of as the
Howard
DNC
was
chair.
Absolutely right. And the answer for it is not that you're going to win in 50 states tomorrow, but you're never going to win unless you plant a flag in those states. You have states, the poorest part of America is the South. And to desert that and not to bring forth a progressive agenda in Mississippi and Alabama,
or in some cases, even to run candidates.
That's right. I think I just don't see how you could be a national party and abdicate a responsibility for a good part of the country. Here's what I think. I think a lot of the folks in the Tea Party, for example, would be very surprised to know, A, who started the Tea Party, and what the ideology is of the Koch brothers, who in fact funded the beginning of the Tea Party. So you go to somebody and you say, the people who funded the Tea Party, started it, they believe that we should abolish Social Security. Wow, really? They believe in unfettered free trade. They believe that we should end Medicaid, that we should end Medicare, that we should end the concept of the Environmental Protection Agency. They believe that we should give more tax breaks to billionaires. How many people in the Tea Party actually know that this is the ideology of the people who founded their movement? So I think, I'm not going to say that somebody says, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I'm with you, Bernie. Not going to happen that easily. But I think if we can make the case that government should work for all of us and not just the billionaire class, that in fact we have to strengthen and expand Social Security, etc. I think you got a shot to get some of those people. I think the Republicans have done a brilliant job over the years. They're very smart guys in dividing people on a million different issues.
They divide people on gay marriage. They divide people on abortion. They divide people on immigration. And what my job is, and it's not just in blue states, believe me, we're going to go to red states, we're going to go to conservative states, is to bring working people together around an agenda that works for their kids and works for their parents. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Having a trade policy that creates jobs in America, not in China. Making sure that all of our kids can get a college education regardless of their income. Fighting for pay equity for women workers. We have an agenda that I believe can bring people together. And when we do that, we're going to win this election very easily, I think.
There's so much gridlock and paralysis in Washington right now. However, I think it's important to put it in context. You know, President Obama got a lot done in those first 2 years, and you know, in my opinion, his leadership helped save our economy from dropping into a Great Depression. We already had the worst financial crisis since then. Something I care a lot about because I still have the scars to show for it. He got the Affordable Care Act passed, and we now have 16 million Americans who have health care. And you know, he really did push through a lot of important changes in the way agencies operate, the government operates. But, you know, he ran into what is often the reality is that the midterm elections come and the people who voted for him don't turn out and vote for the Democrats necessary for him to continue doing his job. Happened to my husband. You know, when Bill passed the economic plan in 93, 94, my gosh, he took on everybody, raised taxes on, you know, the highest income earners. And then people who had voted for him didn't turn out and vote, and he lost the Congress. And President Obama, you know, lost the House. And then he won re-election because people came out again because it was a presidential year and they could vote for President Obama. Then, you know better than anybody here in Iowa, it was a terrible midterm in 2014, and we lost the Senate. I say that because people ask, well, what more could President Obama do, or what more could I do? And I think those are fair questions. But I also think, what more could every American do who cares about the direction we're headed? And so the first thing I would say is I'm gonna campaign to elect Democrats and to try to win back the Senate that we lost, because I know that it will be easier to try to put through an agenda. I'm going to campaign on an agenda like the New College Compact, so that there can be no doubt in anybody's mind, this is what I intend to do. And when elected, this is what I will do. I will also go anywhere, anytime to meet with anyone to try to find common ground. I know from my own experience, 8 years in the Senate, 4 years as Secretary of State, and also watching, you know, my husband deal with the Congress in those 8 years of his presidency, there is no substitute to building relationships, despite how frustrating it might be. That's true in life, it's true in business, it's true in anything. It's also true in politics and government. I'm going to tell you a little story. So when Bill lost the Congress in 94, the Republicans shut the government down twice. He vetoed their really deep cuts in Medicare and Medicaid and other important programs. And then he had to negotiate with them, but after he had showed he was not going to give in to them. So for the next few years, Newt Gingrich would be out there on TV saying terrible things about Bill, and often about me, nothing new about that. And then around, 9 o'clock, he'd come to the White House. He'd go up the elevator to the private second floor quarters where presidents live. Hi, we'd say, hi. Then he'd go sit down with Bill, and they would start to try to hammer out a principled compromise. Now, I will say this for Gingrich. He actually knew that in order to govern, if you're in the legislative branch, you do have to compromise. Some of the people there now think that they don't have to. It's like, my gosh, it's just like nothing I've ever seen. They don't believe they have to compromise. They think that they're sent there not to compromise. Can you imagine us even starting our country if at the Constitutional Convention everybody said, no, we're not compromising? That's just not the way a democracy works, and not the longest lasting democracy in the history of the world. So I will meet with anybody, and I will look for those places where we can get something done. I'll give you a final example. So when I graduated from law school, I went to work not for a big firm or anything like that. I went to work for the Children's Defense Fund. And I was, incredibly honored to be able to do the work I did on behalf of poor kids, neglected kids, abused kids, kids with disabilities, all kinds of problems. And I was very committed doing something about foster care and trying to figure out what we could make different. So when I was First Lady, I was still anxious to do something about foster care. And I found out Tom DeLay, otherwise known as the Hammer, had been a foster parent. And so I called him up. And I said, Congressman, would you work with me on trying to make some changes in adoption and foster care law? It was a silence. But then he said, what do you have in mind? And I said, here's what I think would help. He actually came to the White House, did an event with me. We never agreed on anything else. But I think it's important to put together coalitions around specific issues. And somebody I found in the Senate, somebody you have nothing in common with 99 out of 100 times, you might very well write a bill with one time. And you have to be open to that. You can't carry grudges. You can't get frustrated or discouraged. You can't take personally what they say about you. Yeah, one of my favorite comments about all of that is Eleanor Roosevelt, who said that, any woman who wants to be in public life needs to grow skin as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros. And so you just have to be ready to keep working every single day. And I will do that, and I hope we'll be able to get some good things done for the country.